So I get asked one question, and I get asked that one question a lot. How much does it cost me to rebuild superbikes that I've bought from auction? Well, today I'm going to explain it all to you, and the answer might surprise you. So before I go into the detail of just how much each of these two bikes cost me to build, it helps to understand how I actually approach this, and I approach each of these builds with a plan before I've even purchased it. So there's three things I do before I even purchase a bike. Number one, I do a spreadsheet on every single bike I'm looking at buying. And that spreadsheet has a few things. It's got how much I think I'm going to buy the bike for, how much I think I'm going to sell the bike for, how many parts I have got to buy, just like an average idea of how much the cost of each part is going to be. And then also how much I think I'm going to make off eBay by selling parts I don't need. So what I end up with is basically a feasibility as to whether or not it's actually worthwhile even buying the bike in the first place. Okay, so let's first look at the Aprilia. This is a 2017 RSV4 RF, and we got this around about 3 months ago. We thought we were going to build it in around about 2 weeks. It ended up taking us 4 to 5 weeks to build. So there's a few things we had to factor in. So the most obvious expense is how much the bike cost me. So this bike, including delivery, was $6,000. And what I like to do is keep most of my purchases between $4,000 and $7,000, because by the time you put all the parts on them, you're going to sit around about that $15,000 to $22,000 mark end price. So I'm going to round a couple of my numbers up ever so slightly, just so it's easier to explain. Racing fairings, plus the carbon, because it all came from the same place. So we've got full race fairing kit, we've got carbon side panels, we've got carbon front guard, we've got carbon swing arm guards, all up $2,000. Okay, so everything in the cockpit of the bike. So we're talking switchgear, grips, bar end levers, all of that, including an RC19 Corsa quarter, $1,500. Okay, so next up is electronics. We had to get a new ECU and a new ignition combo with a dash. The whole thing came as one. We actually got that for $595, so I'm going to round it up to $600. Okay, so let's go to the front of the bike. We've got these, the Aprilia OEM carbon fiber brake ducts. They were $300. We've got the paint for both wheels. That was $120. That's actually a super cheap way to make your bike look a lot better if you know how to paint. We've got the carbon brake discs, carbon brake pads. They were $175. And we've got the screen. That's a WRS racing screen. That was also $165. And in the middle of the bike, we've got engine protection. So both sides, engine protection. I actually managed to get this like run out stock. So I got it way cheaper than it was supposed to get. I got it for $300, but normal retail on these is $440 for both sides. We also had to buy a complete new rear set, not for this side, but for the other side. So all up, that cost me $450. And for the back of the bike, well, let's start with a new set of Michelin. So front and rear Michelin TD track day slicks, $550. And then we also managed to get these, a set of chain tensioners. These are not brand new, these were secondhand, so these were actually $250. If I wanted to buy them brand new, probably about $460. Okay, so now let's talk performance, because you can't build a track bike and not see how powerful it is. So I budget $1,000 for a dyno test and dyno tune. So I also allocate $250 for new fuel, new oil filter and new air filter, and $120 for all the decals on the bike, some of which I actually cut myself. So one of the things that's really hard to budget for is all the little items like the fixtures and fittings which do things like hold fairings together or hold body panels on the bike. I pretty much have around about $100 for those sorts of things. So some of them are genuine Aprilia OEM parts, some of them are self-fabricated parts on the 3D printer, but roughly $100. So the sum total of this bike is around about $14,800. Now that's a pretty good build, because if I was true and I really wanted to find out how much this build would cost, I would also need to add on labor. We'll talk about that in a minute. And now onto one of my favorite bikes. This was a 2022, well it is a 2022 BMW S1000RR race. And the reason why it's a race is because it's got some more adjustability than a standard RR. It's got the swing arm pivot is adjustable, and it's also got an adjustable offset top steering head. So on top of that, it's got a few other bits and pieces, but yeah, that's the crux of what the race actually stands for. So I bought this bike, and you're going to be surprised. Delivered to my door, $4,600. So I know what you're thinking. You're thinking that's far too cheap for a 2022 BMW, but there were some fundamental issues that had to be fixed, and I needed to buy expensive parts for them. So the number one thing is I needed a new set of forks. So $2,000 for a new set of forks. I also needed a new wheel, and if I bought one of these wheels through BMW, I was looking at $2,900, but I managed to get one through BMW Germany, and it was only $1,400. So let's talk about the cockpit, because this actually cost me a lot of money. I had to get the screen fixed, so I sent it to a guy in Sydney. He put a new surround around it and put a new screen on it. Now that's actually possible, so I'll make sure I put a link in the description as to where you can go to get that done. That was $1,000, actually $1,150 to be honest. We've also got a kill switch, we've got carbon CNC racing reservoir, and we've got some other bits and pieces. On top of that, we had to get a completely new throttle, which was $500. So all up, not including the triple clamp, was I think $1,100 just in small parts, and $1,100 to get the screen fixed. The triple clamp, we needed a new one because the first one, a little bit bent. So I thought, let's get something that's adjustable. So I went with a Robbie Moto triple, and it's got a 0, 2 and 4 mil adjustable offset. All up, delivered, that was $1,700. That's quite a bit of money. So finishing off the front end, we also got a Brembo Corsa Corta RCS 19 master cylinder. Can you say that fast? That was $650. And some other little bits and pieces. We got a quick release tank cap, and we got some bar ends, both from Monkey Bones, all up $159. But by far one of the biggest expenses on this bike had to have been the bodywork, because I wasn't going to settle for just straight fiberglass. I wanted carbon fiber, and I wanted a lot of it. So we've got carbon fiber wings, we've got carbon fiber tank cover, carbon fiber rear hugger, carbon fiber swing arm covers, and more carbon fiber than just that. $2,200 in carbon fiber alone. The race fairing itself was a 5-piece race fairing kit. That is all Pro Fiber fiberglass. That was, I think, including the race seat, I think that was $1,400. That's getting up there. Okay, so at the front of the bike, again, we've got a set of Michelin TD Track Day slicks, $550 for a set. We've got dual carbon pads for the brakes, I think $165 or $175 for the set. Coming further back, we had to get new foot pegs. They were $165 each for both sides. GB Racing engine covers for this bike was way more expensive because I think there's 4 in total, 2 each side. These were, I'm pretty sure they were $480 for the set of 4. And then what you can't see under here is actually a full Black Widow header system, which was $985. So that attaches to the Acro. Luckily this came with the bike, we didn't have to buy it. And there's quite a few things that you can't physically see. So we had to take the bike to BMW to get it serviced. We had to get them to check it on their software system for all the error codes. So that was around about $400. We've got lots of little hoses and clips and fittings, roughly about $250 worth. So it all starts to add up, if you get my point. And then last but not least, we've got performance. So the dyno on this bike, including a new chain, we're looking at $1,300. So we put a DID gold chain on it, and we managed to get 207.46 horsepower out of this beast. So It is an absolute weapon. Okay, so the BMW, roughly $22,800 once I add up all the little costs that I didn't necessarily put in my spreadsheet, costs of screws and bolts and tape and small items like that. This bike, roughly $14,800, so they are not cheap, but gotta remember, there's one big thing that we're leaving out, and that is my time and labor. So if you were building one of these bikes for yourself and you were lucky enough to get a really good price at auction, you might be able to get it to a roundabout market value by building it yourself. But I gotta be honest, that is very hard to do. So this bike we've actually sold and we lost a few $1,000s on it. And the Aprilia will maybe break even if we're lucky, but I suspect we'll probably lose around about $500 on this as well. Now, if I was to take into account my labor, I would be looking at around about 60 hours of build time on this bike and about 50 hours of build time on this bike. So at market mechanic rates of $120 an hour, you do the math, but that is $13,000, $14,000 in labor that I do not add on. So once I divide that by 2 and add it to the cost of these bikes, I am well behind. So I guess the purpose of today is to just tell you the truth. Like, what does it really cost me to build bikes? And reality is, quite often I lose money. Sometimes I break even, but there's not really a profit in this game. So if you want to build a bike for yourself, I suggest you keep a spreadsheet. Figure out how much that bike is going to cost you from the start and try and be realistic when you're setting your prices. Search through eBay. Look at eBay across the whole world. Don't just look at your country. Search through Facebook Marketplace. There's quite often good deals to be found on second-hand parts, and there's nothing wrong with quite a lot of second-hand performance parts. You might save a fair bit of money. And just be realistic. Do you really need all those top-level performance parts if you're building yourself a track bike? Maybe, maybe not. But fingers crossed you've learned something out of this, and hopefully that answers the question as to what it really costs me to build bikes. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe. You know the drill. Okay, so you probably don't want to see a bike video without hearing these puppies start. So let's give them a bell. Sounds good. How about this one? This one's a little bit louder.